You know what time it is. Got it on the first try. Hi. Welcome to Storytime with Chris. We are back, lovelies. We are back. I know I seem a bit lower energy today. I've had a very, very, very long day, long weekend. Um, I apologize about that. Music was a little bit too loud, but that's okay. That's actually a lot better because now you can hear me. So, let me explain a couple of things. I am back. Storytime is not going anywhere. Next month, March 27th, will mark 4 years of Storytime with Chris. And no, I don't do this for profit. I do it to get kids as well as adults excited about reading. If you want, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel. It only takes like 3 seconds, and it's all in the bio of my Facebook as well as Instagram. The link to my YouTube channel is in my bio. Today is a very special day because today marks 12 years of my grandfather, my granddad, Pete Herbert Sains. May he rest in peace. He passed away 12 years ago when I was a sophomore in college, and I had the honor and pleasure of, amongst other amazing family members, speaking at his funeral. I wrote a very beautiful poem that I still have for him, and I might actually read that. This week when I can gather the energy to do so. And here's the thing, y'all. I love my job. I love what I do for people, and it is never a chore. But I do have to agree that I am human, and these things happen to where I get incredibly exhausted. More so because of the mental fatigue rather than the physical fatigue. Because I love doing for people, and the only thing I ask is that people can be receptive, be helpful, and be present. My grandfather was a loving person. He had a nickname for everybody, and my nickname was Redbone. Why is that? For all my black and brown brothers and sisters, you know exactly where that comes from. But no, I happen to have a lighter skin tone. I happen to be golden brown melanin, and I love every minute of it. I love when I, tan up during the summertime and it just pops. So my granddad used to call me Redbone all the time. I miss him very much. But return to show love to people when they're down and out, to be a listening ear, to be a good friend. My grandfather was an amazing person. He was very well loved. I remember when he passed away, there were so many people at the funeral that it was pretty much standing room only because there were so many people trying to clamor in to, pay the respects and, be there for the immediate family. Oh, goodness. I couldn't find the top. I'm so sorry. That's why I'm in my room today. I wanted to be in a space where I can allow myself to feel the emotions I'm feeling. It's not necessarily grief, but just reminiscing, being grateful for what he's taught me, the lessons that he taught me about how to treat people who even are cruel to you or is not as considerate as you are. And even when I deal with people like that, I still try to give out love, patience, generosity of spirit within reason. Not everybody has that type of accessibility to me. However, I believe in the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And my grandfather was a great example of that. My grandfather, P. Herbert, was amazing. He just was so loving. He would give a nickname to everybody, could talk to you about horse races, football, basketball, baseball. He was a huge baseball fan. He was a coach for a minor league softball team that were champions for years, and his number is still around to this day, his uniform number, which is number 19, which is so interesting because 9 is actually one of my favorite numbers. But 19 was my grandfather's jersey number. And so I just wanted to say that today. So if I seem a little bit different, that's really where that's coming from. Plus, I've been on my feet all weekend. I've literally been up and down all weekend. So I appreciate your patience with me. Now, out of all of that, let's go ahead and get started because you came to hear a story. All right, hopefully not too far. Oh, okay. Okay, we're here. Okay. There we go. And we're back with Lloyd Alexander's The High King. So this is the last book, y'all. We're actually about to enter into chapter 11. And those newer episodes, as I posted about last week, I've been having some technical difficulties getting my videos off of Facebook to later upload them to my YouTube channel. And now that I have the ability to just directly upload from YouTube with the amount of views and followers that I now have for the channel, now I can go live on there and just hit the bell notification so you don't miss a vid. It notifies you anytime I go live or anytime I upload a new episode. So make sure you hit that bell notification. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, Granddad. Thank you for always loving me. And thank you for always supporting my dreams. Thank you. Chapter 11. The Fortress. For an instant none could speak. The silver bells at the legs of Pederi's hawks tinkled faintly. Then Taran was on his feet, sword in hand. The Cantreave lords shouted in rage and drew their weapons. Gwydion's voice rang out, commanding them to silence. Prederi did not move. His retainers had unsheathed their blades and formed a circle about him. The High King had risen from his throne.
"You sport with us, son of Hwyl,"
Math said severely.
"but treachery is no fitting matter for a jest."
Prederi still stood with arms folded. His golden features had turned the color of iron.
"Call it no jest," he answered, "and call me no traitor. This I have pondered long and closely and with much anguish of heart. I see now that only thus can I serve Prydain."
Gwydion's face was pale and his eyes grave.
"You speak in madness," he replied. "Have Aurorn's false promises blinded you to reason? Would you tell me that a liegeman of the Death Lord serves any realm but a Nuven?
To me, Aurorn can promise nothing I do not already have," answered Prederi. "But Aurorn will do what the Sons of Dawn failed to do, make an end of endless wars among the Cantreaves and bring peace where there was none before." "The peace of death and the silence of mute slavery," Gwydion replied. Prederi glanced about him. A harsh smile was on his lips. "Do these men deserve better, Lord Gwydion? Are all their lives together worth one of ours? Crude brawlers, these self-styled Cantreave lords, are fit to command even their own house lords." Households. I said house lords, but that was a bit odd. Hold on. It's household, sorry. There we go.
"I choose what is best for Prydain," he continued. "I do not serve Aurorn. Is the axe the woodcutter's master? At the end it is Aurorn who will serve me."
With horror, Taran listened to the words of Prederi as he spoke to the High King.
"Lay down your arms. Abandon the weaklings who cling to you for protection. Surrender to me now. Caer Datho shall be spared, and yourself and those I deem worthy to rule with me."
Math raised his head.
"Is there worse evil?" he said in a low voice, his eyes never leaving Prederi's. "Is there worse evil than that which goes in the mask of good?"
One of the Cantreave lords sprang from the council table and, blade upraised, started toward Prederi.
"Touch him not!" cried Math. "We welcomed him as a friend. He leaves as a foe. But he shall leave in safety. If any harm even a feather of his hawks, his life shall be forfeit."
"Go from here, Prederi, son of Hwyl," Gwydion said, the coldness of his tone making his wrath the more terrible.
The anguish of my heart is no less than yours. Our comradeship is broken. Between us there can only the lines of battle, and our only bond the edge of a sword.
Pryderi did not answer, but turned on his heel, and even his retainers strode from the great hall. Even as he mounted his steed, word spread among the warriors, and they started silently in their ranks. Beyond the walls, the armies of Pryderi had lit torches, and the valley flamed as far as Taran's eye could see. Pryderi rode through the gates, the crimson and gold of his raiment shimmering like the torches themselves, and galloped towards his waiting host. Taran and the Commot men watched, sick with despair. They knew, as did all in Caerdathel, this glittering king, like a hawk of death, had snatched their lives, and now bore them away with him. Gwydion had expected the army of King Pryderi to attack at first light, and the men in the fortress had labored through the night, making ready to withstand a siege. When dawn came, however, and the pale sun rose higher, Pryderi's battle host was seen to have advanced but little. From the wall, Taran, Fluter, and Cole, with the other war leaders, watched beside Gwydion, who stood scanning the valley and the heights that dipped in raw ridges to the flatlands. Snow had not fallen for some days. Gullies and rocky fissures still held streaks and patches of white, caught among the crevices like tufts of wool, but the broad meadowland was, for the most part, clear. The dead turf showed in dark brown splotches under a ragged mantle of frost. Scouts had brought word that Pryderi's warriors held the valley in strength and barred passage through the battle lines. Nevertheless, no skirmishes or flanking columns of riders had been seen abroad, and the scouts judged from this and the station of the foot soldiers and horsemen that the attack would come in a great forward thrust, as an iron fist against the gates of Caerdathel. Gwydion nodded.
Pryderi means to strike in all his might, though it will cost him dearly. He can be spendthrift of his warriors' lives, knowing we can ill afford to pay an equal price.
So what he's trying to say there is, this man, his army is so immense that even if he were to lose 100 men, it wouldn't stop him from being successful. So, not to suggest that war is glorifying in any type of way, because it's not. Anybody that tells you and has experienced true war knows that war is not fun. It is not something to be, celebratory of. It's a inevitability when two opposing sides feel as though they are right in their own way. It just happens. But in this case, one would be smart to strategize. That's why it's good to be vigilant and always be 3 steps ahead rather than 2 steps behind in any given situation. He frowned and rubbed his chin with the back of his gauntleted hand. His green eyes narrowed as he peered across the valley, and his lined face was that of a wolf scenting his enemies.
Lord Pryderi is arrogant, he murmured.
Gwydion turned sharply to the war leaders.
I will not await a siege. To do so would be sure defeat. Pryderi has numbers enough to flood us like a wave. We shall give battle beyond the fortress, and we ourselves strike against the wave before it reaches its crests. Math, son of Mathenwy, shall command the inner defenses. Only at the last, if so it must be, shall we retreat into the fortress and make our stand there.
Gwydion looked for a long moment at the halls and towers of the castle, which had now caught the early rays of the sun.
The sons of Dawn raised Caerdathel with their own hands and built it not only as a shield against Arorn, but as safeguard for the wisdom and beauty of Prydain. As I would do all in my power to shatter Pryderi, so would I do all to spare Caerdathel from destruction. It may be that we shall gain both these ends or lose both. But we must battle not as sluggish oxen, but as swift wolves and cunning foxes. The Prince of Dawn spoke quickly to the war leaders, clearly setting forth the tasks of each. Taran felt uneasy, as a boy who had dreamed of taking a man's place among men, as a boy had deemed himself well fit to do so. Now, amid the grizzled, battled-wise warriors, his strength seemed feeble, his knowledge clouded. Cole,
sensing Taran's doubts and thoughts, winked encouragement at him. The stout old farmer, Taran knew, had paid close heed to Gwydion's words, yet Taran guessed that a corner of Cole's heart was distant, busily and happily occupied, with his turnip patch. For much of the morning, Pryderi's host held its position, while the defenders quickly formed their own battle lines. At some distance beyond the walls of Caerdathel, heavily armed fighting men stood ready to bear the brunt of Pryderi's assault, and there Gwydion himself would command. Fflewddur and Lion, with Taliesin and a company of warrior bards, held a post across the valley. The Commot horsemen would be at the flank of Pryderi's attack, and it would be their task to slash into the onrushing wave, to disrupt and sap the strength from the enemy's arms. Taran and Cole at the head of one troop, and Lessard, trusted to lead another, galloped to their stations. Gurgi, silent and shivering in his huge jacket, drove the banner of the white pig into the frozen ground to make a rallying point. Taran felt the eyes of the foe watching every move, and an odd impatience mixed with fear drew him taut as a bowstring. Gwydion, astride Mellingar, rode up for a last glance at the ordering of the Commot men, and Taran cried out to him, "Why does Pryderi wait? Does he mock us? Are we no more than ants to him, laboring at a hill to be crushed at his pleasure?" "Patience," answered Gwydion in a tone that was both the reassurance of a friend and the command of a war leader. "You are swords added to my hands," Gwydion went on. "Do not let yourselves be shattered. Move quickly. Stay not over long in one fray, but start many." He took Taran's hand and Cole's and Gurgi's. "Farewell," Gwydion said almost brusquely, then spun Mellingar about and rode swiftly to his warriors. Taran watched him until he had disappeared, then turned away towards the distant towers of Caerdathel. Eilonwy, along with Glu, had been commanded to remain in the fortress under the High King's protection. Taran strained his eyes in the vain hope of glimpsing her on the walls, but she might feel for him. He was no surer than he had been in Caerdalban, but despite his resolve, he was on the verge of speaking his own heart fully. Then suddenly, like a man swept away in a flood, he had been caught up in the rallying of warriors without even a moment to say his farewell. Yearning pierced him, and regret for his unspoken words was an iron hand gripping his throat. He started and clutched the reins. As Mellingar snorted, a white cloud began to paw at the ground. At a glance he saw Pryderi's host had risen and was signaling into the valley. The battle was upon him. It came quickly. Not as the slow cresting wave Taran had expected. First was a swelling sea of shouting men. The Sons of Dawn were not awaiting Pryderi's charge, but were racing ahead to grapple with the attacking foe. He saw Gwydion on the rearing white shape of Mellingar, but Taran could not tell the instant of the first clash of arms, for in a moment, instead of two tides, there were only one that spun and shifted in a great convulsion, a whirlpool of spears and swords. Taran sounded his horn, and as an answering shout came from Lessard, clapped heels into the flanks of Mellingar. Cole and the Commot horsemen spurred their mounts after him. From a swift canter, the powerful legs of Mellingar stretched to a gallop. The stallion's muscles heaved beneath him, and Taran, sword raised, plunged into a sea of men. His head spun, and he gasped as if drowned. He realized he was terrified. Around him swore the faces of friends and foes. He glimpsed Lonio, flailing right and left. The man's makeshift helmet bobbed over his eyes. His legs were drawn up high in the stirrups, and they looked nothing so much as a scarecrow come to life. Yet where Lonio passed, attackers fell as wheat to a scythe. Heaven's burly frame rose like a wall in the midst of the combat. Of Lassar there was no sign, but Taran thought he could hear the young shepherd's high-pitched battle cry. Then a furious roaring reached his ears, and he knew Lion with Fluder had entered the fray. In another moment, aware of nothing beyond its blade in his hand, Taran was locked in a blind madness with warriors who thrust at him and whose blows he strove to return. Again and again Taran and the Commode horsemen slashed deep into the attacker's flanks, then wheeled to gallop free of the iron whirlpool, only to plunge back again. In a flash of clarity, Taran saw glittering gold and crimson. It was King Predery on a black charger. Taran struggled to engage him. For an instant their eyes met, but the son of Hwyl made no attempt to answer the challenge of a ragged horse. Instead, he looked away and continued to press ahead. Then he was gone. And it was Predery's scornful glance that stung Taran more sharply than the blade which swung up from the mass of foemen to lash across his face. Ooh. I opened the lid. Ooh, sorry, y'all. Once the swell of the armed tide flung Taran to the fringes of the battle, he caught sight of Gurki's banner and tried to rally the horsemen around it. A trough had opened up amid Predery's ranks. In another moment a horse pounded toward him. Luagor, a warrior armed with a long lance, clung to the steed's back. "Go back!" Taran shouted at the top of his voice. "Have you lost your wits?" Eilonwe, for it was she, half halted. She had tucked her plaited hair under a leather helmet. The Princess of Lear smiled cheerfully at him. "I understand you're upset," she shouted back, "but there's no cause to be rude." She galloped on. For a time, Taran could not believe he had really seen her. Moments later, he was struggling against a band of warriors who slashed at Melilas, threw themselves against the stallion's flanks, and strove to bore down horse and rider. Taran was vaguely aware of someone seizing his mount's bridle and dragging him to the side. Predery's warriors fell away, free of the press. He turned in the saddle and blindly flung up his sword against the new attacker. It was Cole. The stout farmer had lost his helmet. His bald crown was as scratched as he had plunged headlong into briars. "Save your sword for your foes, not your friends," he cried. Taran's surprise left him speechless an instant. Before he stammered, "You saved my life, son of Colfair." "Why, so perhaps I did," replied Cole, as though the idea had suddenly come to him. They looked at each other and burst out laughing like a pair of fools. Only towards sundown, when the sky itself seemed streaked with blood, did Taran gained a new sense of the battle. Gwydion's warriors flung across the path of Predery's advance, and it met the full flurry of their attackers. The hosts of Predery faltered, as though stumbling over their own dead. The wave had crested and hung poised. Now a fresh wind surged over the valley. Taran's words leapt as shouts of renewed strength rang from the warriors of dawn. They pressed onward, driving all before them. Taran sounded his horn, and with the Commode horsemen galloped to join the sweeping tide. The ranks of the enemy parted like a shattered wall. Taran clutched at his reins. Melilas reared and whinnied in alarm. A shudder of horror racked the valley. Taran saw and understood why, even before the rising current of torrents reached his ears. "The cauldron board! The deathless warriors!" The men of Predery fell back to let them pass, as if in fearful homage. In ghastly silence, their pace neither fast nor slow, the cauldron board filled the breach, and the valley rang with the tread of their heavy boots. In the crimson haze of the dying sun, their faces seemed all the more livid. Their eyes were cold and dull as stones. Unfaltering, the column of deathless warriors bore toward Cardathel. Among them, slung about with ropes, they carried an iron-capped battering ram. The foemen flanking the cauldron board now suddenly to launch a fresh attack against the Sons of Dawn. In horror, Taran realized why Predery had delayed and understood his arrogance. Only now had the traitor king's plan reached its fulfillment. Beyond the long column of cauldron-born, fresh fighting men streamed from the heights. For Predery, the long day of battle had been no more than a mockery. The slaughter had begun. At the fortress, bowmen and spearmen of the inner defenses thronged the walls. The mute cauldron-born did not falter in the storm of arrows. Though every shaft found its mark, the foe moved steadily onward, pausing only to rip the arrows from their unbleeding flesh. Their features showed neither pain nor anger, and no human cry, no shout of triumph passed their lips. From Anuvan they had journeyed as though from the grave, their task only to bring death, unpitying, implacable as their own lifeless faces. Against the pounding of the battering ram, the gates of Cardathel groaned and trembled. The massive hinges loosened, which, while echoes of the driving rams shuddered through the fortress, the portal splintered, the first breach gaped like a wound. The cauldron-born gathered strength once more to force their ram forward. The gates of Cardathel shattered and fell inward. Trapped between the ranks of Predatory's warriors, the Sons of Dawn fought vainly to reach the fortress. Sobbing with fury and despair, Taran, helpless, saw the cauldron-born stride past the broken gates. I am so sorry. That was my stomach, y'all. I'm so sorry. I had lunch today. I haven't had much of an appetite, so I do apologize for that noise interruption. Before them stood Math, the High King. He was attired in the raiment of the royal house, belted with links of gold, and on his brow glittered the gold crown of dawn. About his shoulders was a cloak of fine white wool, wrapped as though it were a burial garment. Outstretched, his withered hand gripped a naked sword. The deathless warriors of Anuvan halted as if the faint stirring of some cloudy memory. The moment passed, and they strode on. The field of battle was silent now. An odd hush had fallen even upon the men of Predatory. The High King did not turn away as the cauldron-born drew closer. His eyes fixed theirs as he raised his sword defiantly. Unflinching, he stood in pride and ancient majesty. The first of the pallid warriors was upon him. Grasping the flashing sword in his frail hands, the High King swung it downward in a sweeping blow. The warrior's blade turned it aside, and the cauldron-born struck heavily. King Math staggered and dropped to one knee. The mass of mute warriors pressed forward, their weapons thrusting and slashing. Taran, covering his face with his hands, and turned away weeping as Math, son of Mathenwe, fell, and the iron-shod boots of the cauldron-born pressed their relentless march over his lifeless body. From the dark hills then there rose the long notes of a hunting horn, trembling, echoing among the crags, and a shadow seemed to brush the sky above the fortress. Now, behind the cauldron-born, the men of Predatory streamed through the broken gates, while waves of attackers drove the remnants of Gwydion's army into the heights, scattering them amid snow-filled gullies. From Cardathel came new claps of thunder as the ram of the cauldron-born turned against the walls to breach them in turn. Flames rose above the great hall, above the hall of lore, and the middle tower was unfurled the crimson hawk of Predatory. Behind it, blotting out the dying sun, spread the black banner of Arorn Deathlord, Lord of Anuvan. Cardathel had fallen. And that is where we're going to end for today. I told you, y'all, this is the final act in a very long, whimsical, funny, heartbreaking journey. And that is the tragedy of war. However, King Math, I would imagine, would be I would say, the equivalency of a 50, 60-year-old man. Maybe even older. And the fact that even though he knows that the cauldron-born cannot be killed, they cannot be easily destroyed, the fact that he stood his ground and didn't run away, and took responsibility for his people and his position, is a greater courage that I don't think most people could appreciate. You see, children, courage, by definition, is acknowledging one's fear of a situation and still having the energy and the wherewithal to do it. That is actual courage. Courage is being knowledgeable that you are afraid, but still being willing to face that fear despite it. That is true courage. And that's not something you can easily pick up. That's something you grow with and learn about and experience over time. And over time, it gets a lot easier. And then when you get to my age, then you're not as afraid of a lot of things you used to be. So without further ado, I'll see you next time, y'all. I love you so much. I love you all very, very much. And I thank you so much for being patient with me. And I will talk at you next time. Bye-bye.